So if you miss, today, if you miss a part, or if you want to watch it again, or if you, where am I? If you want to, or if you miss one of the episodes, you could say, okay, so this should be okay. Okay. Yes. So let me officially start. So welcome everybody. Welcome here to World Virtual Tours. Welcome to the Free Academy. So this is the second installment of the Free Academy series about one painting, one story. And I immediately want to say, this is not a good title. I chose one painting, one story, because there are many stories. And so last week I said, the title should be one painting, many stories. But for this one today, the title should have been one painting, too many stories, because it's really too much. I already regret. I'm sorry. Regret. Oh, I can't talk anymore. That I chose this one, because yes, there's so much to tell about this, and sometimes we don't realize, because we know a painting and we know already a lot of background. And then so when there is some new information, we can immediately absorb that. But if you are not familiar with the painting and in the whole background, and also the background of the Italian history, of course, I have to tell you a little bit about this historical background. So I just hope it won't be too tedious or too complicated, because we will talk about a time that is extremely complicated of the Italian history. So now I will close the chat. And so, at the end, I will open it again. So today we're not really in a terrible hurry. So that should be okay. And then let me share my screen with the presentations that we can really start. Where is it? Okay. Yes. And so, yes, Free Academy course, one painting, one story. And the background of this slide is what we are going to talk about today, the very famous portrait of Federico da Montefeltro. So, yes, this is all based on donation. So at the end, if you think it was worth it, you can always leave a donation. It's very welcome, of course. And so last week we talked about Raffaello and the famous Pala Baglioni, where we talked about the conspiracy and about this family. Today, we go back to Urbino, you could say, the birthplace of Raphael, because we're going to talk about, Federico da Montefeltro, the Duke of Urbino. And then next week, I will be, I will talk about Siena, the very famous fresco, the allegory of the good and bad government. So that will be a completely different thing. And then the last one will be Pinturicchio, with a very small painting that, is probably unknown. Probably you've never heard of it. But the story behind this is really interesting. And so that will be for the next weeks. And so let's immediately start with this gentleman, Federico da Montefeltro. So this portrait is, of course, very famous. I think everybody has seen it, even if you don't know who it is, or if you don't know the whole background. This is very famous. It's probably also the most famous nose of the history or the art of painting. We will come back to this nose. So this is Federico da Montefeltro, and this was painted by Piero della Francesca, who was a kind of court painter of the Montefeltro family in Urbino. And you have to realize that this is part of a diptych. So there are two panels. And so today, this is how they present it in the Uffizi. So if you want to see it, you have to go to Florence, you have to go to the Uffizi gallery. And so it's presented in this frame, which is not the original frame. It's not the original frame. This is a frame they chose to present it in the Uffizi gallery. But so it's two pieces. So on the right-hand side, Federico da Montefeltro, and in front of him, his wife, Battista Sforza. I'm going to talk about them, of course, just in a minute. But so today, this is a painting in the Uffizi gallery. Oh, yes. And of course, it also has a back. So, these panels, they are also painted on the back. And of course, we're going to talk about what it represents. later on. But so this is how it's presented today in the Uffizi gallery. So, it's almost like in the middle of a room. So you can walk around it, obviously, so that you can see both sides. But again, this is not the original frame. In origin, probably it didn't have a frame at all, or something very simple. So probably you could open and close it, so that there must have been a kind of hinge system. But so, we are not sure about this, but this is not the original presentation, the original frame. Now, you must know, so this today is in the Uffizi gallery in Florence, but originally it was in Urbino, in the Ducal Palace of Urbino. The fact that today it's in Firenze, in the Uffizi gallery, the Uffizi Museum, the building originally was from the Medici family. So the fact that today this portrait of this important Duke of Urbino nowadays is in a building that was owned by the Medicis is a bit of an irony, and you will know why at the end of this presentation. But you have to know, so this painting arrived in Florence already in the 17th century, because the last member of the dynasty, you could say, of the Montefeltro, she married into Florence, into the Medici family. And so she brought, the archives, for example, the archives of the ducal family. She brought paintings, so she brought other things with her to Florence. So that's how the painting ended up in Florence. But for quite a while, it was forgotten. Even in the 18th century, nobody knew anymore, what it really represented. And so in one of the, you could say in an archive, in a kind of list of works of art, this one is listed as a portrait of Petrarca and Laura. So something completely different. So you see, for a while they had lost interest in it. And today is one of the most famous portraits in the world, you could say. So this is a painted oil on panel. It's painted by Piero della Francesca, and you see they are not very large, these panels. And so there are two panels. They are exactly the same measure. So one panel is 1.5 by 1 foot, so 47 by 33 centimeters. And the date is a bit of a problem, because here I wrote 1473, 1475. That's the date that is indicated in the Uffizi gallery. So there is no date written on this painting. So we know Piero della Francesca was active in Urbino for quite a while. So he was already painting in 1465, so 10 years earlier. He was already in Urbino painting for this family, for the Montefeltro family. We don't have a contract. This is the official date, but I must say some scholars, they are not necessarily convinced. They say perhaps it was a few years earlier. And, I will tell you also why, because in this case, the dates matter. I don't want to bother you with many dates, but there are some dates that are really important if we want to know exactly when this was painted. And so let's start then with first this panel. So this is Federico da Montefeltro. I will tell you about his biography later on, but first I want to start with just a description of what we see. So here you can see the Duke, of course, in profile, which was really common. So this kind of double panels with a couple of wealthy people or noble people, that was very common. There are other examples. So they are facing each other. They're represented in profile. This is also how they would have been represented on coins. Now, I didn't put, I could have put a lot of slides about all the different coins, but so there are many, many coins representing him in this kind of profile. And he chose this side of his face, because on the other side, he had lost an eye, and so he had been disfigured. We're also going to talk about that. But so it's kind of classical representation. You see here, he's represented with a red head and a red kind of garment. Red is, of course, the color of power, of, importance. He doesn't have a real emotion on his face. So he's looking just in front of him, he's facing his wife. But so it's not that he has a certain emotion. So he exudes, yeah, kind of power, but he's calm. I mean, this is not an aggressive pose. Here he's not represented also in a military way. On this side, here we have some details. So look at the eyes, you know, these kind of wrinkles around the eyes. So you must know that when this was painted, he was more or less 50 years old, more or less. So he had, you know, well, he was not a completely very young man anymore, certainly not for those days. And here you can see, yeah, the hair is represented a little bit, so not really well kempt, so a little bit, you know, tousled, I think you say. And then also, the imperfections of the face and of the skin are also represented. We know that at a very young age, he had a very severe skin disease. We don't know exactly what, but he almost died of it. And so on his skin, there were a lot of imperfections. And so this is, you know, some of these imperfections were left. And then, of course, a famous nose, but we're going to talk about that. So this is Federico da Montefeltro. So you see, represented as, you know, the ruler of Urbino. And I will also show you a map, you know, where Urbino is located and why, you know, it is important. On the background, you can see a landscape. This landscape in reality will also continue in the other panel. Now, on the other side, we have, again, Federico da Montefeltro, but this time he's represented in armor, as you can see on this detail, and he's represented on a kind of triumphal wagon. You see, it's drawn by two white horses. White horses were, of course, reserved for very important people. And so he's accompanied by some ladies. So on the back, you have a kind of winged character that puts a crown on his head. That is a representation of victory. That's quite clear. And the victory, she's balancing on a kind of, a sphere, on a kind of ball. And that is always interpreted that, you know, victory, yes, the crown, but victories, you know, well, you don't have to rest on your laurels. Victory can also be a little bit unstable. And then in front of him on the chariot, there are four ladies. So one is represented from the front, two others from the side, and then one, you can just see the back of her head. So those are the four virtues, the four cardinal virtues. You see the one facing us, that's justice, of course. Then we have one with a broken column, that is fortitudo, so the strength. Then the one in yellow, she has a mirror, and that is the prudence. Prudence with the mirror, she's also looking towards the back. And then the other one must be the temperance then, because those are the four cardinal virtues. And so the temperance is, we can hardly see her. She's a bit hidden. Now, why? Well, you know, perhaps temperance was not his best virtue. And so he was certainly strong. He was also prudent. He was just, but perhaps temperance or modesty were not really his favorite virtues. In the background, you can see this landscape, so the typical hills of Le Marche, because Urbino is located in today's, so Marche, the Marche are one of the 20 regions of Italy. But so, Urbino was a duchy, first a county duchy, there in what today is the Marche. So I will show you a map. And yes, so as you saw on the portrait we are talking about, so on one side he's represented with this, you know, typical red hat and red cap, so as a leader, but not in any military way, but on the back, you know, on the back he is. And that is how we like to represent, or to be represented. You know, this is another very famous painting by Piero della Francesca. This is a detail of this painting. You see the Pala di Brera. It's around the same time. It's painted around the same time. You can see here again, he's kneeling in front of the Madonna and several saints. I mean, I could talk a lot about this painting because it's a typical painting of Piero della Francesca with this kind of icy calmness, this icy atmosphere, this icy light. a very clear light, so nothing is moving. There is this kind of eerie atmosphere. I mean, not in a bad way, but so very special atmosphere. That is typical Piero della Francesca. But so here, he's kneeling in front of the Madonna with the child. And so this is also dated 1472. 1472 is a very important date because in 1472, a lot of things happened, with Federico da Montefeltro. First of all, his long-awaited son was born. I mean, he had already many daughters, but so finally the son arrives in 1472. But a few months later, his wife dies. So sometimes this painting is also interpreted as, the baby, because the baby is really prominent. So could this be a kind of homage to his wife, and then, to thank also for the son? So that is something that is now not really part of this presentation. But so when you talk about Piero della Francesca, you have to talk about this painting, of course. But so this painting, where he's represented in full armor in this case. So, and the armor is beautifully represented. You see how Piero della Francesca played with the reflection of the light on this shining armor. You can see on his shoulder, you have the reflection of one of the big windows of this church. So the window is not represented, you see. Oh, where are we? So the window itself is not represented, but so it's reflected on the shoulder. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going in the wrong direction. And yeah, so I'm sorry. Yes, my hand was on the wrong arrow. I'm sorry. So, and also the helmet, you see, I mean, everything is beautifully represented, but here you can see he has taken off his helmet, but the rest, is in full armor. And yeah, so Palla di Brera, that's in Milano. And yeah, so this is the triumph of Federico da Montefeltro. And underneath, first we have the background with some boats. Now, if you know Urbino, there is no big river with boats there, but part of the territory of the Montefeltro duchy was also, near the sea. And so there used to be a navigable river in that area. And so here you can see this is a quiet landscape, but it's a landscape with, activity, with merchants, for example. So all, of course, this is to make him ideal, an ideal leader, but also military leader. And then underneath there is a text. And because Latin to English is a bit of a problem, but so the inscription says, the famous one, so of course, Federico, is drawn in glorious triumph, and he's equal to the supreme old captains. And the fame of his excellence fitly celebrates as he holds his scepter. So that is this inscription. And we know this inscription was written by hand by Piero della Francesca himself. There's an expert who really just studied this inscription and, the calligraphy. And so below, you can see another inscription that was written on another painting, by Piero della Francesca. And so they are the same letters. So so we are sure this is Piero della Francesca, and he also painted those that inscription, so those letters. And then, if we look then at both of them, you see the landscape continues. That's, of course, beautiful that we have this continuous landscape in the two panels. And this, of course, is Battista Sforza. Battista Sforza, she married Federico da Montefeltro when she was 14 years old, so 13, 14 years old. In those days, it was, of course, not uncommon. And so she was from the Sforza family. So the main branch of the Sforza family were, of course, in Milano, where she had grown up. And then she had, been promised to marry Federico da Montefeltro. And so it was, of course, an arranged marriage, but it was apparently a happy marriage. So she had many daughters. It's not exactly clear how many. But she had many daughters. And then in 1472, after 12 years of marriage, finally, she had a son, so a male heir. And but then a few months later, she died, unfortunately. So she died, you see, when she was only 26 years old. And here she's represented, of course, again, as the ideal, the ideal wife, of course. And we always say the Duchess Battista Sforza, but in reality, she has never been Duchess, because the title of Duke was only given to Federico da Montefeltro in 1474. That's why I say that dates matter. So in 1474, that's when he's made a duke. Before that, he was the Count of Montefeltro. If you visit the famous palace in Urbino, you will see that for example, on the ground floor, often you will see FC, Federicus, no, Count. So the C stands for Count. And then on the upper floors, you have Federico Dux, so FD, because then, in the meantime, he had become a duke. So we always say this is a portrait of the Duke and the Duchess of Urbino, but in reality, she has never been Duchess, because, her husband was named Duke only 2 years later. But, for sake of simplicity, I will call him the Duke of Montefeltro. So, otherwise it was too complicated. If I show you things before 1474 and I say the Count and then it's the Duke. So, he was the Duke of Montefeltro. And so here we see Battista Sforza. Let's see some detail. Oh, yes, no. So we have two other portraits, you could say, but sculpted portraits of Battista Sforza. So this one is a relief, and then there is this one that you can see in Florence in the Bargello. This could be a sculpture from the death mask. So that was really common, that they would take would make wax masks from the deceased person, and then they would, for eternity, then sculpt in stone. So this is Battista Sforza. Yes, if you look at the details, you can see the very elaborate hair. The beauty, we are in the middle of the 15th century, so the beauty ideal was a very pale skin, blonde hair that they would bleach in all kinds of manners. But some people, some people say she is really very pale. Could it be an illusion that this, was painted when she had already passed away? So that's the problem with the dating of this painting, because, the official date in the Uffizi is 1473, so after she died. But this pallor of the skin, that was really, fashion in those days. So I wouldn't take that as an argument, to date. And then also, there is not a mention of the title of Duke. We know that Federico da Montefeltro, for years and years, for 30 years almost, he was so keen on getting this title of Duke. His predecessor, the former one, he had been nominated Duke. Not nominated. He had been given the title of Duke 2 months after he came into office. And Federico, he had to wait 30 years before he officially got the title of Count. Now, there's probably a reason for this, but in the sense that on this portrait, there's on the text also, there's not a mention really of the Duke. So, there's a lot of discussion. I don't know the date of this painting, but so there's a lot of discussion going on about the exact date. But there's no discussion about, of course, the incredible quality of the painting. Look at the detail of these jewels. So this very elaborate hairstyle and dress, and then these gems. So you will always see the sapphire, the blue one, you will see the red ruby, and then the white grayish diamond. So those are the three colors that will always come back. Also on top of the head, it's a ruby, and then with pearls. She also has a very elaborate pearl necklace, you see, with several rows, and then in between again rubies and sapphires. And there's no doubt that they were real. Yeah, no fake, no fake jewels for her. Yeah, so you see also the pearls, how they, I mean, the incredible quality also of the painting, it's really, this is light, light also in gems, like rubies, and there's also light inside. So to try to paint it and get it out is really something very special. Yeah, here in the background, you can see the landscape again with some castles, with some buildings. And then, yes, just this is Van Eyck. Now, this is Van Eyck, of course, Flemish painter. So in the 15th century, the painters in Italy, but also, the Flemish painters, or in what we call the Netherlands, the lower Netherlands, the upper Netherlands. So they were looking to, to paint as true, as near to the truth as possible, and also to try to give depth, of course, perspective and depth. And so the Flemish painters, they worked a lot with the reflection of light. So if you let light reflect on the skin, on metal, on gems, as in this case, well, then, you can bring it to life, and it gains volume. So here, these crowns of these angels, they are almost real. So you see that they have a volume. So it's nothing flat. And so that was a school, the Flemish school. They were really specialized in that. And Piero della Francesca, he was really interested in that. So the fact that he also, is going to go into such details representing these jewels of Battista Sforza. He was certainly inspired. This is another one, of course, typical Flemish. You see how different, it's completely different from the Italian painting. But yeah, so Piero della Francesca, he was into light also. And here we see the backside of the painting of the portrait of Battista Sforza. So here she is also sitting on a kind of chariot, on a kind of cart. This one is pulled by two unicorns. Yeah, here you can see two unicorns. Unicorns are, of course, symbol also of purity. Here, perhaps you could say eternity, but we're not really sure about that. And then you can see, so Battista Sforza, she's sitting in a red dress, and she has a little book. She's not represented in a military way, of course. Again, here, very pale, very white skin. But if you look at the other characters, some of them have also a white skin. And so if on the chariot of Federico da Montefeltro, on the others, on the other panel, we have the 4 cardinal virtues. Here, normally, we should have the 3 theological virtues. So you see the one here in orange. So that is faith. She has a chalice, with the holy bread. So faith. Then we have charity. The one in this dark blue with pelicans, because this is, of course, charity. She didn't sacrifice herself. So charity, faith, and then we should have hope. And now hope normally would be represented in green. So green is the color of hope. And so here we have behind Battista Sforza, yes, we have a character in white which could be chastity. So as we had victory behind Federico, this could be chastity. And then the other one then normally should be hope. But she's represented a little bit, completely in a cloak, in a coat, covered from the back. So is this an illusion that there is no real hope because she had passed away? Or is this something else? So, for example, the temperance that we couldn't really see on the other chariot, could this be the temperance then with the gray color? Because there is also a link with the color of the gems. So we had ruby red. Ruby red is the fire of love and the fire of faith. So the red is linked to the faith. And then the blue is linked to the charity. And so normally, we could have had emeralds, green of hope, but they are not there. So no emeralds. And so is this hope or not? Or is this temperance? Temperance is linked with diamonds and gray. So, well, there's a lot of discussion, and there are even other suggestions for the identification of this character on the right-hand side. But so let's keep it at that because we have to, oh my goodness, half an hour, and we have to go on. And so the text underneath her chariot is Batista. So she who retained modesty in good fortune. So even if she was very wealthy and very important, she always retained modesty. You see temperance. You see, it's modesty, temperance. Now flies through all the mouths of men, and adorned with the praise of her great husband's deeds. So that's what is written. And so here we have the portrait. Here again, you can see the landscape. The background is very icy blue, typical of Piero della Francesca. But now let us talk about this Duchy of Urbino and about Federico da Montefeltro. So let me see if at the end of this presentation, perhaps you will see Federico with a little bit different eyes. So here, the red part on the map, this is where the Duchy of Urbino was located. Today it's of course Italy, but you see it's a little part of Umbria. And then on the right hand side, so east of Umbria, most of the red part is in today's Marche. So the Marche is one of the 20 regions in Italy. The capital of the Marche is Ancona. So just to tell you, so you see there was a part on the sea, so on the Adriatic Sea, which is of course important. And one of the ports was Pesaro on the sea. And then you see the coat of arms of the Duke of Urbino. So you can see two eagles, and then the blue and the yellow. And then in the middle, you can see the papal coat of arms. So the papal tiara and the two crossed keys, because the Duchy of Urbino was a vicary of the Pope. Because if you look at the whole map of Italy in those days, normally, you see, I have it here. So you see how complicated this gets. So all these little part and duchies and counties, and they are not even all on the map. But so if you look at this, the larger yellow area in the middle, that is the states of the church, so the papal states. And then you see in the papal states, because the papal states, they were much bigger than the yellow area. But so, several areas of the papal states had been given as vicaries to, for example, the Count of Montefeltro. So already in the 13th century. In the 13th century, the family of Montefeltro, from the Pope, they get that area. They get a certain area and they say, okay, this is now the county of Montefeltro. Here you are the boss, but if we don't like you anymore, we take it back. So it was always property of the Pope. And so, of course, the counts of Urbino, they're going to conquer bits and pieces left and right. And so the county is getting bigger and bigger. But still, this whole county was always property of the Pope. And so when the last descendant of the Montefeltro family dies without any male heirs, it goes back to the church. So in the 17th century, the whole duchy, then in the meantime, it had become a duchy. The whole duchy of Urbino goes back to the papal states, and then it becomes part of the papal states. So just to tell you why and how it worked. Now, in the days of Federico da Montefeltro, so we are in the middle of the 15th century, there were mainly 5 big powers. So the 2 blue ones, you see, we have Milano on top, and then Florence, of course. Milano, there were the Visconti and the Sforza. So first the Sforza, then the Visconti. Then you have the red ones. So the 2 lower one, the lowest one is Naples, the Kingdom of Naples. And then you had Rome. Then the one in the middle, that's Urbino. But Urbino was not the biggest of this area, but just so there were the 2 blue ones, then the 2 red ones at the bottom. Venice was constantly a bit back and forth, and so Urbino is part of the papal states, but at certain moments, they're going to change alliances all throughout, and then it's war, war against the Pope. This is a picture of the ducal palace of Urbino, with left attached to the cathedral of Urbino. Now, the Federico da Montefeltro, so when he is first count of Urbino, he will start to build a huge palace. And so not only just to, because he wanted something big, but also because he needs a lot of space, because he wants his palace and the whole town of Urbino to, he wants to put it on the map. And so he invites architects, artists, he invites poets. I mean, he wants to make an ideal Renaissance court. He had the largest library and most important library of the whole of Italy. So some people say the Pope had a larger one, but probably not. Probably Federico da Montefeltro. So he became fanatical. So, he wanted his court to be the most, I mean, perhaps not beautiful in appearance, but, of content. So that's what he wanted. You have to know this. It's a huge building in the end, a small town. And so this, if you want to know about the life at the court of the Montefeltro in Urbino, you can read the book of the Courtier. It was written by Baldassare da Castiglione. So he was, and this, by the way, is a portrait made of him by Raphael. So Baldassare da Castiglione, he was in that court, not in the court of Federico, but of his successor. So he knew Urbino, and he knew, he gives a nice description. And so he says, for example, it's not that Urbino that Urbino has a palace. It's the palace that is Urbino. He says the palace is the town. And it's true, because there were 500 people living in that palace. So the whole court, 500 people. And in the rest of the center of town, so inside the town walls, there were something like 1,000 people. So you can imagine how important it was. And so all the chronicles of those days, they give us an impression of Federico da Montefeltro. He was a lord, of course. He had this incredible palace, but he was interested in the arts, and he was interested in classical, also literature, and ideal, of course. That's what the chronicles of his days, told about him. And that's also how he liked to be represented. For example, this is another painting. This is not by Piero della Francesca, but here you can see the Duke with, he has an armor, but he's reading a book, and it's not just any book, but, one of his books that he had ordered to be specially copied for him and bound for him. And then you see him with his little son, little son there. He's 2 years old, probably. And then on his leg, you have the symbol of the Order of the Garter. He had been given the Order of the Garter by the King of England. He had the ermine around his neck, that he was also member of the Order of the ermine from the King of Naples. So here he's represented with all his honorary thing. So at the top on the left, you can see the cap of the Duke, so the ducal cap, just above the head of his son also, the official heir. So you see, it's not just the painting like this. This is really everything that was important to him is represented on that painting. And then if you take a close-up of the helmet, you see a reflection probably of the arches and the columns of the ducal palace. And so, unfortunately now I didn't put another picture of it. And here you can see, so on the right-hand side, you can see the Studiolo. So you can visit the ducal palace in Urbino. It's an incredible palace, must have been the most beautiful palace of his time. And so he built himself a Studiolo, so a little room that was just for himself, where also, again, all the symbols that were important for him are represented on these wooden panels. And then you have all these paintings with personalities, with people that were also important to him. That's that's important. And so here you can see the Studiolo. This is wooden lay work. It's really incredible. Here you see books, and there are music instruments, and then there are representation of also of his military objects and of religious objects. So in this Studiolo, he represented himself as the ideal Renaissance lord. And that's how he wanted to be remembered. And that's how he was remembered until 1982. Until 1982, nobody would ever challenge the image of Federico da Montefeltro. But in 1982, that was the 1982 was the 500th anniversary of his death. So there were all exhibitions and congresses, and that's when one of the professors of Urbino started to say, everything we know about him is because of his own propaganda, is because of these paintings, is because of his palace, because of the studiolo, it's because of people at the court who wrote about him. For example, Baldassare Castiglione. But also in the days of Federico himself, there was Giovanni Santi, the father of Raphael. He also wrote about the deeds of the Duke. So, there's a lot of propaganda going on. We'll come back to that. Yes, I think I will skip that. But for example, here we have one of the books that were part of the library of Federico da Montefeltro. So he wanted certain books. So he had really a list. He said, I want all the important books. I want them all. And so, of course, they had to be copied. And so they had to be copied. And so he had his, do I have it here? Yes. If you want to know more about this whole book copying business and book binding business, you can read this book, The Bookseller of Florence. It was written in English by Ross King, with a lot of background, a lot of references. And so, Federico da Montefeltro, he wanted certain books, and so he had them copied. And so then he had them bound in the most beautiful bindings. I mean, really incredible. And then, of course, the books that he ordered, so on the left-hand side, you see this is the beginning. So when you open the book, and so you see this is a painting, really, a painting on the book that represents the Order of the Garter. You see on the blue circle, you see Ogni sua chi mal y pense. That's the motto of the Order of the Garter. So you see it's all for the glory and the triumph of Federico da Montefeltro. Now, oh my goodness, it's already time flies by. So I'm not ready yet, but so here we see, so just some information. So Federico da Montefeltro, he was born in 1422 in Gubbio. Gubbio today is in Umbria, but it was part of the Duchy of the Montefeltro, of the Duchy of Urbino. And he dies in 1482 in Ferrara after a battle. So, he was 60 years old, but he was participating in a battle. He got ill. So he was not wounded, but he got ill, probably malaria or something, and he died in Ferrara. And then his body was transferred to Urbino, where he was buried. But so he was 60 years old. So that's the time frame we are working at. He was born in Gubbio, so just outside of the town. There is a castle, the Castello di Petroia. So, and according to the biography, the official biography that was written in his days, he was born in this castle, the Castello di Petroia, as an illegitimate child of the Count of Urbino, Guida Antonia da Montefeltro, and a lady Elisabetta degli Accomanducci. So that's one version, that he was the illegitimate child of the Count. And this is the Castle of Petroia. You can stay there. Today it's a residency where you can stay. They have hotels. It's beautiful. It's really a medieval castle. You see, and then they organize all kinds of things. So Castle di Petroia, it's a beautiful place. And so the other version is that he was the son of the illegitimate daughter of Guida Antonia. So in this case, he would have been the grandson of Guida Antonia. So not his illegitimate son, but, his grandson. And the illegitimate daughter of Guida Antonia, because there was a whole bunch, one of them was Aura da Montefeltro. And Aura da Montefeltro, she was married to Bernardino Ubaldini della Carda. And this Bernardino Ubaldini della Carda, he was one of the you could say surgeons of Guida Antonio, of the Count of Montefeltro. He was his faithful assistant, a man in arms. And so, he was married to the daughter of Guida Antonio. And so they had a son, Ottaviano Ubaldini, who was 1 year younger than Federico. And so at the bottom, do I have another one? Yes, here you can see in the palace, you can see this sculpture, who we see on the right-hand side, we see Federico da Montefeltro, and on the left, we can see Ottaviano Ubaldini della Carda. So perhaps his brother, perhaps his brother. So that's and if it wasn't his brother, then it was a kind of nephew. So, I mean, yeah, you see, but so we don't know. Nobody really knows. But yeah, in any way, this Ottaviano on the left, he will remain let's say, the political branch of Federico in the palace. I mean, Federico was constantly away. He went to all the battles. He was a condottiere, so he was always at war. And so when he was not at home, it was Ottaviano who was in charge of all the affairs of the Duchy of Urbino. So often perhaps there were two brothers. And then, okay, so 1422, Federico is born. And then in 1424, he's officially adopted, or adopted is not the right word, but he's officially acknowledged by Guidantonio. So Guidantonio says, okay, this is my illegitimate child, but now I'm going to make him legitimate. And I'm going to make him the heir of the county of Urbino. Because, he didn't have any male heirs, official male heirs. So, his wife didn't have children. And so Guidantonio, the count, was already 40 years old. And he said, and so he said, okay, Federico will be my heir. And so he was officially, legitimate. And then he was invited to the palace in Urbino. And so he started to be educated in Urbino. But then, his father, Guidantonio, he becomes a widower. His wife dies without children, and he remarries. And now his second wife, she has a son in 1427, and that's Odantonio. So the half brother then, or perhaps not. I mean, you see how complicated this is. So Federico da Montefeltro. So Federico is 5 years old. And he's kicked out of the palace, not by his father, but by his second wife. Now, the second wife, of course, sees him, says, okay, he has to get out of here. And so, he has to leave, Urbino has to leave the palace, and then he will start to be trained for a military career. Instead, Odantonio, that you can see on the left, will become the official heir of Urbino. Now, Odantonio, so as you can see here, was the son of Guidantonio and Caterina Sforza. Caterina Colonna. Caterina Colonna. And Caterina Colonna was a sister of the Pope. So you see, it was quite interesting to have direct access to the Pope. And so Pope Martin V, who was also a very important Pope, but I don't want to go into that, even if it's important. But so his name was Odone Colonna, but he becomes Pope Martin V. But so he was the uncle of Odantonio. And Odantonio had been named Odantonio to honor, Odone and his father, Guidantonio. I hope it's not too complicated. Now, let's go back to Federico. Federico, so 5 years old, he has to leave the palace of Urbino. He is sent first to another noble family. And then when he's 11 years old, he comes in Venice, where he will be part of the Compagnia della Calza. The Compagnia della Calza in Venice, they were very famous. They were all young, very young, Federico was 11 years old, but so very young boys from noble families, from very important families. They had these compagnie, especially during the carnival. During the carnival, they would do all kinds of, things, pranks, but prank is perhaps a very little word. And so one of the symbols of this Compagnia della Calza are these flames that you can see underneath. So these flames, you will see them everywhere in the palace of Urbino and also in the palace of Gubbio that Federico had built. Now, not everybody agrees that these flames are the symbol of the Compagnia della Calza, but yes, so there's a bit of discussion, but he becomes a member and he will never forget it. He will never forget that his first real yeah, the first real group that he was part of was that in Venice. But then he's oh yes, and here you can see, for example, on the ceiling of the palace, you can see these these flames, these kind of flames. Okay, and then he's sent to Mantova. In Mantova, there was this gentleman, Vittorino da Feltre. He was a teacher, he was a philosopher, a humanist, and he had founded this kind of school in the Cazzoiosa, would be the Casa Gioiosa. So because he said body and mind should work together. So you cannot just have a military career where you can just, you learn to fight. No, your mind has to be also shaped. And the other way around, people shouldn't always stay just in their study, they should also move. So that was a kind of new education. And so Vittorino da Feltre will be immortalized in the studiolo. Later on, when Federico da Montefeltro will build his big palace and then the studiolo with all these portraits, he will not forget his master Vittorino da Feltre. And so you see, he was born, then adopted, he goes to Venice, Mantova, and then he's 15 years old when he marries his first wife, Gentile Brancaleoni. There's a typo, it's Brancaleoni, but they won't have any children. So they are married for 20 years, but no children. And then when he's 16 years old, in 1438, he gets his first command. So, he has a military career. And so if you want to know all the commandments, so all the wars, all the battles he fought, for whom and how much he was paid, you can go on this website. There is a website, and there is also an English translation. So Condottieri di Ventura. I started to copy it on a document, but it was more than 50 pages of 40-year long career as a commander. He started out with just a few hundred, but then he ended up with a few thousands. And then it's really, I read them all. I read the whole list of all the battles he participated. And so it's really in a matter of months, he's fighting for Milan against, for example, the Pope, and then for Florence against this one, and then for the Pope. So, whoever paid him. But so in this long career, but already very, very young age, he will get an incredible reputation of a good commander. And so he had, of course, defeats, but he also had a lot of victories. And so very quickly, after a very short period of time, there are cities or counties, or you could say countries, that start to pay him to avoid a war. So, for example, if one state says, Federico, we pay you, now I'm making this up, we pay you 10,000 florins for, so that you attack that, or you fight for us in that battle. The enemy sometimes would pay more to avoid this. So, that's of course wonderful, if you don't have to fight anymore, you're just being paid like this. And all this money, it's true, a lot of this money will be invested, of course, in his palace and all his projects in Urbino. And yes, but here you can see in 1443, so when he's 21 years old, his father dies. So the Count of Urbino dies. And of course, he's succeeded by Odantonio. Odantonio is 16 years old, and he succeeds as the Count of Urbino. And after 2 months, he's already named Duke of Urbino. And but after a year, he is killed. And he's killed in a conspiracy. So he's only 17 years old. He's sleeping at night. And there is a description. Let me see. They say, the assassins, in the middle of the night, they break through the palace gate with a beam, and they make their way towards the Duke's chambers. So the Duke is, of course, this one, Odantonio, 17 years old. The first victim is the proto-notary Manfredo Pio, followed by Tommaso dell'Agnello, who hides under the bed. The Conspirators pull him out and kill him with dagger blows. Awakened by the noise, Odantonio attempts to escape, but is discovered. He falls to his knees in front of a large crucifix, begging for mercy. But 2 stabs strike the Duke, and a blow from an axe to the head finishes the job. The bodies are thrown out of the palace window, and the body of Odantonio is carried to the town square. As a final insult, his genitals are cut off and placed in his mouth. Due to his numerous abuses against married women and innocent maidens. You have to know, he was Duke only for a year, something like that, but the reputation he built up in that year was terrible. Apparently, he transformed, in less than a year, he transformed the peaceful town of Urbino, very, wealthy, prosperous town of Urbino, in a terrible place with a terrible atmosphere. He just killed randomly. He raped, all the girls he met, according to, these accounts. And he was only interested in horses. That was the only thing he was interested in. And for the rest, when he needed money, he would just take it. He would not show any mercy or also any insight in commercial issues. So he had a terrible reputation. And so apparently everybody was glad that he was killed. And so he is killed in the middle of the night. So they cut his body into pieces on the square. And people start to say, we need Federico, we need Federico. And so they say, okay, immediately some people are dispatched to go and fetch Federico. Federico allegedly was in Pesaro, 35 kilometers away. But in reality, he was already there. He was just outside of the town walls, and he just waited a few hours, and then he entered in triumph and acclaimed by the population, and that's how he became the Count of Urbino. Now, there's a lot of rumors, and everybody is more or less convinced that that at least he knew about this conspiracy. He was there, so he was already waiting for it to happen. So did he organize the conspiracy? That's of course a question we will never know. A lot of people are convinced. So the people who study Federico, they say they are convinced that he organized it. Did he? Didn't he? But he was aware of this, and so he entered in triumph. Now, there is an indication of that he could be the organizer of the conspiracy, and that is in this painting. This painting is probably one of the most mysterious paintings of the 15th century. It officially represents a flagellation. You see on the left part, you see Jesus tied to the column. You see the flagellation. On the left, you see Pontius Pilatus was represented. So a flagellation of Christ. It was painted by the same Piero della Francesca around 1450. So we don't know the exact date, but around 1450. And so, but what is this about? Because the flagellation is in the background. And then on the right-hand side, you see these 3 persons that are in the foreground. What are they doing? They are dressed as the people from the 15th century. So there are 2 levels. And here, this is a detail of Jesus and the flagellation. But here, if you put it on a computer, you could say, you see that the 3 people outside, they are way away from the flagellation. They're on, they're really outside. So there are 2 levels here. There are 2 stories. There are 2 levels, and perhaps also 2 time frames. So we see what is happening inside. That is the flagellation of Christ, 2,000 years ago. And what is happening outside, that's something of the 15th century. And so there are 2 ways of reading this. So nobody really knows the exact interpretation, but so there are 2, I could do a whole presentation only about this painting, but so there are 2 ways to give an interpretation, or the 2 main interpretations, let's put it this way. So one says that Pontius Pilatus, in reality, is a portrait of Johannes Paleologos. Johannes Paleologos, with this typical head, as you can see, was the emperor of Constantinople who had come to Italy it's true, to to ask the Christians for help. Constantinople was in danger, was menaced by the Turks, and then fell in 1453. And so there was, in those days, everybody talked about a crusade. We have to organize each other. And so, let me see. No, I'm sorry. So it could mean that here we have Jesus, who's representing Christianity who is menaced by this gentleman who is seen from the back. That could be the Turkish threat. And then on the left, we have Paleologos. So this painting could then be a call for a crusade, a call to the arms. And then these gentlemen could be, for example, on the left, Cardinal Bessarione. We know he was in charge, you could say, of the whole diplomatic diplomatic work, we could say. So in those days, he was very powerful. On the right-hand side, who could that be? That's also a whole list of names. But look at his garment. You see on his garment, on the right-hand side, you see these plants. Those are charts. I think you see kind of thistles. You see charts. And so here we have, in Italian, it's cardo. And so here we come back to the Carda family, Ubaldini della Carda. So this could be a member of the Ubaldini della Carda family. So this is a call for the to go to a crusade. And of course, the Montefeltro, since they were part of the papal state, they were also called, of course, for this crusade. But this interpretation, with a lot of variations, doesn't explain the other gentleman in the middle. This young man who's staring into the distance, blonde. Do I have? Yeah. No. So what is he doing there? So there's no nice explanation. He's also barefoot. So the others are not. So what is this? So here we come to the next interpretation. And the next interpretation is completely different. And so therefore we have to go to the golden legend. So La Légende dorée, Jacopo da Varazze. So we have talked about this before. The Golden Legend is a kind of book with all lives of the saints. So these are all biographies of the saints. This book was written in the 13th century. And so Piero della Francesca, who painted this panel, he knew this book very well. And in the chapter about the life of Saint Matthew, there is a story that tells us about, I don't know why, I think there is something, but in the chapter of Matthew, he's telling us about Judas. He says Judas, in reality, he was a kind of orphan, but he had been adopted by a queen. But when the queen had her own child, he was, sent away. So here we have a parallel with the life of Federico. And so Judas and Federico, both first adopted and then sent away. And so Judas, he ends up in the court of Pontius Pilatus as a kind of assistant. And and then we all know what Judas is doing. Judas will betray, he will betray Jesus Christ. And so in this case, if I go back, we could say that, okay, here we have, can the court of Pontius Pilatus, we have Jesus, but so Jesus was betrayed by Judas, but then these ones, who are they? Well, on the left, we have Judas, but this is Federico da Montefeltro. Federico da Montefeltro, who together with, his real father, perhaps, Bernardino della Carda. So perhaps with his real father, he will, betray his half-brother, Od Antonio. So Od Antonio here, so in the middle, we have this, you see, he's looking into, he's not really participating in this discussion. And, there is perhaps a resemblance if you look at the official portrait of Odantonio. So could this be Odantonio? Odantonio, who was betrayed by this Judas, by Federico da Montefeltro. And then you can see Jesus Christ. They have the same position. They have one foot a little bit in front of the other. This arm is a little bit crooked. And then also column. So Jesus would then represent, of course, Odantonio. The column, he was linked to the Colonna family. I mean, this is a theory. We don't have any explanation for that. Now, of course, if this painting is a kind of accusation of Federico da Montefeltro as a Judas who betrayed and had this conspiracy, organized a conspiracy against his half brother, why on earth would he ask Piero da Francesca to make something like that? Well, the answer is that he didn't. So this painting, which is now in the museum of the Ducal Palace, in the origin was not there. In the 18th century, it was somewhere else. It was in the sacristy of the cathedral. And they don't really know how it came there, but you have to know that Piero della Francesca in 1450, when he painted this, he was not in Urbino, he was in Pesaro. And he was in Pesaro, where he worked for the Malatesta family. The Malatesta of Pesaro and Rimini, they were the sworn enemies in those days, of Federico da Montefeltro. And so one of the half sisters of Federico, Violante Malatesta, you see the name on the left, she was the sister of the murdered Odantonio. I hope it's not too complicated. But so Violante Malatesta, she was a sister of Odantonio, who was brutally murdered at 17 years old. And so as soon as, he was murdered, Federico, he had sent all these sisters away. They were not allowed to come back. And so it could be that Violante da Montefeltro, who then, married a Malatesta, with Piero della Francesca at the court, so that she asked Piero della Francesca to make this painting as a kind of accusation, a kind of hidden meaning, so that, that it wouldn't be forgotten. But so who knows? And so in 1444, he becomes the Count of Montefeltro, but he will have to wait 30 years before he's becoming a duke. Now, 30 years in the Roman law is the time of prescription. So if you murder someone after 30 years, it can be, yes, there is a prescription. I don't know in English how you say, but so that means that you are, okay, then you can forget it. So you can't go on trial anymore. So could that be, that the Pope was forced to wait exactly 30 years before he could nominate him a duke? We don't know. Now, in 1451, there is this famous tournament where he loses one eye and where he gets this cut in the nose. There are rumors that he lost his eye, he was disfigured, but in order to have a better view, then since he lost an eye, that he asked himself, that his nose would be, little part removed so that he could see better. That's a rumor. We have no idea. There's no account and no document. And then in 1460, his wedding with Battista Sforza, many daughters, but then 1472, the birth of Guidobaldo, and then the death of Battista Sforza. But in that same year, in June, there is a battle in Volterra. So yes, okay, this is Guidantonio, the heir, Guidantonio. But in Volterra, so the Medicis in Florence, they have asked Federico da Montefeltro, since he had this army and, he was a condottiere. So the Medici said, okay, Federico, we have a problem with Volterra, because near Volterra, they had discovered some mines with very important minerals, but Volterra wanted to keep it, of course. And so the Medicis wanted that. And so Federico, he leads a very successful army against Volterra, but it will deteriorate in lootings, in rapes. I mean, people of Volterra were killed that was a chapter in his history. I mean, it's not really clear if he was responsible for that. I mean, that's a bit too long now. But anyway, he is victorious in Volterra, and then he's acclaimed in Florence. So he enters Florence in a triumphal They had never seen something like that, a triumph, a parade, and he's showered with all gifts and all kinds of things by Lorenzo de' Medici. And so in that moment, everything is okay. And so then, fast forward 1478, we have the Pazzi conspiracy. The Pazzi conspiracy was on the 26th of April 1478. Lorenzo and Giuliano de' Medici, who were attending mass in the Florence Cathedral, they were victim of a conspiracy where Giuliano de' Medici died and Lorenzo was wounded, but survived and could get away. And it's called the conspiracy of the Pazzi because the Pazzi family, the big rivals, big bankers in Florence also, that they are considered to be the organizers of this conspiracy. They were certainly, involved because Francesco Pazzi, he was the one who had to kill Giuliano de' Medici, for example. And so there were then after this failed conspiracy, they were all executed and so on. But so the conspiracy of the Pazzi was always considered, okay, it's the Pazzi family who did this. But now, 20 years ago, a document was discovered. And so it's a document written by Cicco Simonetta, or better, so Cicco Simonetta, he was the secretary of Sforza, so Sforza of Milan. And he is, yes, of Galeazzo Maria Sforza, who will be killed in a conspiracy 2 years before, Giuliano de' Medici in 1476. And so a descendant of the Simonetta, Marcello Simonetta, 20 years ago, something like that, he published this book, The Montefeltro Conspiracy, or in Italian, L'Enigma Montefeltro, because this Marcello Simonetti is an historian and a paleographer. He studied the archives of the Urbino, so of the Montefeltro family, of the Duchy of Urbino, archives of different families, and so on. And so he wrote this book because he discovered some documents. And so one of the documents is this one. It's a letter that is signed by Federico da Montefeltro. So all this material here comes from Marcello Simonetta. So, in his book, you can find all the references and so on. And so here you can see a letter. It's a letter that is signed by, you see on the bottom, Federicus Dux, Urbino. So, and then the last words are the 14th of February. See, 14th of February, 1478. So just 2 months before this conspiracy. Now, try to read the letter is much longer, but these are the last lines. So try to read it. You won't be able to because it's in cipher. So this is in code. And Marcello Simonetta, when he saw this letter, of course, I mean, it's in code. How can you decipher it? Well, his ancestor, Cicco Simonetta, he wrote this kind of a manual how to decrypt letters. Now, I won't give you the detail, it will take us too long. But so Marcello Simonetta today, he applied this manual his ancestor wrote more than 500 years earlier. And so he was able to decrypt this letter. And so, he just said, for example, he knew this was a letter for the Pope. This is a letter Federico wrote to the Pope. In those days, Pope Sixtus IV. And so he knew there must be this the words La Sua Santità, so your holiness, it must be somewhere in the letter. And so he tried to look and he found several times the same kind of, writing. So he said, this must be then the letter A and the letter T, and this is how he got for it. And then you can see on the bottom, you can see F, like an F2. That's why he found then in the Vatican, he found a book on all these ciphers from Urbino. I mean, incredible material, of course. And there he saw that this F with this sign means the Florentine people. So Florentines, the Florentines. And so he could decipher this letter. And then there is one, where is it? yes, one part of the letter, you see, where with the red line, that is not in cipher. And so there, Federico thanks the Pope for the gift he received, the very, very precious jewel that he received from his, how do you say, for his son. Yeah. So for his son, you see this very big necklace. So so that is not in cipher. So this is telling us this letter was for the Pope. And so, you know, la sua santità, and so on. And on the right-hand side, you can see a portrait, you know, of Guido Baldo, so the son of Federico da Montefeltro, who received this incredible. So this color that was like massive gold, very heavy, is of course a gift of the Pope to Federico and to his son. So he acknowledges also the dynasty. So it's like an acknowledgement. And so Pope Sixtus IV here is represented on a fresco by Melozzo da Forlì, and he's represented with his nephews. You know, he was really a nepotist. So the one in red is his nephew, Giulio della Rovere, who will become Pope Julius II. But so Pope Sixtus IV on his throne, he was a della Rovere, a della Rovere. And so the one there is the Rovere, and the other one on blue with the necklace standing, that is Riario, another nephew. So all nephews, all important people. And so from this letter, because of course the letter that was decrypted, it is clear that Federico da Montefeltro, he knew about this conspiracy, and that the Pope not only knew about this, but unlike his official, you know, he always said, you know, I didn't want any bloodshed. But, you know, from the letter, from the document, it's clear that, you know, it's an order to kill. It's an order to kill the Medicis. And so here on the left, we have Giuliano de' Medici, who was killed during the conspiracy. And on the right-hand side, we have the Sforza, who was killed 2 years earlier. So this Chico Simonetta was the secretary of this one on the right-hand side. But you have to know, these two portraits remained by the bedside of Lorenzo for the rest of his life, so that he wouldn't forget this conspiracy. And Federico da Montefeltro was not only involved, but actively involved in the conspiracy. So together with the Pope, because the Pope then said, Federico, so this conspiracy is taking place. And so when the Medicis are killed, immediately you have to go in with your army, because there will probably be, you know, some chaos. So you have to go in with your army. And so Federico stood with his troops outside of the town walls when the conspiracy happened. But as soon as it was clear that it failed, of course, well, he left. And so what he did was he wrote a letter of condolences to Lorenzo de' Medici. It's a bit of a... And so in this letter, he says, okay, condolences, but then, yeah, I don't have the translation in English, but so here it says in quite a strong wordings, but, you know, you should be modest. You know, this is a kind of lesson for you. Be careful. So it's quite a menacing language he uses. And so Federico da Montefeltro, he had received a promise, apparently, from the Pope, Sixtus IV, to get a portrait of him in the Sistine Chapel. You know, Sixtus IV, he had this Sistine Chapel built. He had the walls decorated, of course, the ceiling, and so by Michelangelo, that comes later on. I mean, the ceiling, Giulio della Rovere, the nephew of Sixtus IV. So Sixtus IV starts the decoration of the chapel on the walls, and his nephew, Julius II, he will then, you know, have Michelangelo make the ceiling. And on the back wall, there was this painting by Perugino, you know, with the Holy Virgin, and you see kneeling at the bottom. Yeah, my computer is stuck. No. Kneeling at the bottom is Pope Sixtus IV, you see? Pope Sixtus IV. And so that was the painting on the back wall. But of course, that painting disappeared. You see, that painting disappeared when the Michelangelo painted his Last Judgment. And you know, the Last Judgment has been ordered or commissioned by Clemens VII, who was a Medici Pope. So the Medici Pope wanted to get rid of the portrait of Sixtus IV, most probably. Now, anyway, Federico da Montefeltro had been promised a place somewhere in the chapel, a portrait of the chapel on the back wall, probably next to Pope Sixtus IV, but the Pope didn't, in the end, he didn't do that. And we know from a letter, again, a letter in the archives, that Federico was furious. He was really furious. He said, who the Pope thinks he is, that he, and then there are other letters. This is a confession of Antonio Maffei da Volterra. Antonio Maffei da Volterra, he was supposed to kill Lorenzo de' Medici, but he failed. This is his confession then. So, I mean, he in the end, he made a mess of it. It's because of him, because, he was from Volterra. So the city that had been, the city that had been so badly attacked by Federico da Montefeltro. And so he hadn't forgotten. So, okay. And so he was against the Medici, of course. But before he wanted to strike Lorenzo de' Medici, he wanted to yell something. So he yelled something like revenge or something. And so those seconds were enough then for Lorenzo to get away. And I think I have to stop here, because you see how complicated everything. So this is Guido Baldo da Montefeltro. This is a portrait of made by Raphael, also in Uffizi. So that was the son of Federico da Montefeltro. And so Federico da Montefeltro is buried here in this little church outside of Urbino. Could also talk, because now they did DNA testing and so on, but unfortunately there is no DNA available from the remains of Federico, because they're in a too bad state. So they took it from his half sisters, but the results are not out yet. And so Federico, after all these conspiracies, that, did he organize them, or was he at least involved of them? Well, yes. And perhaps with this portrait, he didn't want to show not only his ugly side, but perhaps the darker side. And so, perhaps you can look at Federico da Montefeltro now with some other eyes. Yes, I have to. I'm way out of over time. So yes. So I hope it was not too complicated, because it's really not easy to get a kind of logical story out of this. But so so World Virtual Tours is only based on donations, of course, and so. If you enjoyed it, I will open the chat. Let me see if there are some questions, but I won't have a lot of time. So the chat is open. I don't know if you have complicated questions. It will be difficult to answer, and also I don't know everything, because you see there's a lot of new information even about the date of the painting. So yes, I opened the chat. Yes, so go on YouTube. If you go on YouTube, you can find the on YouTube, you can find the YouTube and the World Virtual Tours channel. I can't find it back. Wait, the problem is if I do it like this, I don't know if I interrupt anything. Okay, here. The name of the wives? No, they were just named, as they were. They didn't become, these surnames. That is something quite modern. Before the 19th century, there wasn't that they took the names. She would have a title, so she would become Battista, Countess of Montefeltro or something because of her title, but it's not that she would lose her name. So why did I choose this painting? Well, I wanted paintings with a story, and so here there's a lot of new stories. This Marcello Simonetta, he did a lot of research. I mean, he knows everything, and he knows all the letters, and so his conferences are really very interesting. Perhaps you can find some on YouTube in English. I'm not really sure, but so really an interesting person. So a painting with some story. There are paintings where it's difficult to talk for an hour, but here, the whole world of Federico da Montefeltro. Okay. Well, so I will leave it by here. Thank you for joining me. Hope to see you. Well, on Thursday will be, with the third installment about Assisi. So thank you and hope to see you again soon. Bye, everybody. Bye-bye.